Did you know that 70% of wrongful convictions come from eyewitness testimony? Remember, the entire point of Plato's philosophy is that sensory input traps you in a cave of illusion. And if you can't trust your own senses, then there's no way you can trust someone else's. Once you get this, you'll never watch the news again. Every reporter, historian, and scientist on Earth sees the present through the lens of the past. And theologians are no different. For all of their supposed differences, did you know that science and religion are trying to achieve the same thing? Not only do they seek the same result, but they agree on the process required to make it a reality. You see, there's only one story because there's only one cycle, and that cycle is the fall and restoration of paradise. And that's why science and religion were invented, to achieve paradise. For science, this may look like a cure for a disease, clean energy, or a utopian society. For religion, it might take the form of heaven, peace on earth, or a universal Garden of Eden. But the point is that both ideologies share a presupposition that we're moving onward and upward to better things. While the end goal varies in form, the path they take to get there remains the same: addition by subtraction. That's because it's universally understood that simplicity is divinity. Truth can be hidden or muddied. And while America's founding fathers said that truth is self-evident, we all know humans are easily swayed by superficial or superstitious distractions. That's the point of Plato's cave. Anyone who says trust the experts is gaslighting you. This includes education. For science, the path to paradise can be as simple as maintaining a clean lab and making sure an experiment is free of any outside imperfections that can sully the outcome. Religion does the same thing. They just call it dying to self, forgiveness of sin, or even the lake of fire. But both are based on the idea that the only way to get gold is to remove the dross. Paradise can't be passed on. It must be restored. This is why every nation is only one generation away from enslavement. But as the saying goes, everyone has a plan till they're punched in the mouth. The problem is that it doesn't matter how carefully you conduct your experiment or how dutifully you memorize your holy book. The data has to be interpreted. And that's the inescapable flaw of the scientific method. It requires detached observers. But it's impossible to remove human bias. And if that isn't bad enough, we're now learning that reality itself is fundamentally unobservable. We've all seen the studies showing most labs can't replicate or reproduce the outcomes of their experiments. But did you know that half of all scientific papers are flat out wrong? At first glance, we write this off as accidental p-value manipulation or poor statistical practice. But unfortunately, that isn't the case. An example of this is a 2014 study on racism and red cards. Researchers did all the grunt work, collecting data, and asked 29 teams to give their analysis. And you guessed it, every team gave a different result. All of us are programmed. Every field of study suffers from professional bias, even something as seemingly incorruptible as physics. And if you get a physicist to let down their guard, they'll admit that most of modern physics is conjecture. And we won't even get into how Robert Maxwell sullied scientific publishing by turning it into a business, an extremely profitable one. Thomas Kuhn reminded us in 1961 that scientific data isn't absolute truth, and that our current system is based on a flawed and broken peer-reviewed derivative thinking paradigm that limits discovery. Phrases like trust the science are laughably unscientific. And it's worse in medicine. Pharma dictates medical protocol. If you go against it, you're not getting published. Science always leads to scientism. Why? Because everything in the universe follows the same cycle. This fall occurs anytime it's politicized. An example of this is when Francis Bacon told King James that the best way to trick his subjects into doing something they didn't agree with was to use the word science.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
Did you know that Hal in 2001: Space Odyssey represents how dangerously close-minded scientists are? Academia is always the last group to accept change. Science isn't a thing, it's what a thing does. And science doesn't say anything. People do. And all of those people are brainwashed.
Our eyes and ears take in electrical signals which our brains interpret based on our expectations. We don't see reality. We see our reality.
The reason we seek a grand unified theory is that our understanding of space and time is incompatible. It doesn't take a genius to know there already is a grand unified theory. As Planck said, science advances one funeral at a time. Never forget that every statistic can be negated by another statistic. There isn't a single fact on Earth that isn't contested by equally compelling evidence. No one goes into a study neutral. All experts are gaslighting you. No exceptions. I've already pointed out how our holy books can't be about the end of the world, especially if they are written before the Age of Enlightenment. And the archaic ideas of eternal torment and substitutional atonement are going the way of the dodo because they aren't only immoral, but illegal. We may have been told that God was racist and had favorite locations or dates, but none of it was true. Now, this doesn't mean our religions are wrong, but it might mean we're evolving in our understanding of the divine, especially since those views don't come from God's Word, but from how humans read it. And the idea that God's Word is a book is a perfect example of this. The Logos is everywhere. The reason we forget is because of this guy. Matter is just an emanating expression of God. There is no separation. God is the goal of all things. All progress is returning home. There's only one story because there's only one cycle. Our theological differences depend on what part of the cycle we favor. The cataphatic legalism of Augustine focuses on the fall, while the apophatic philosophy of Aquinas focuses on the return. But never forget that literalism was invented. All cataphatic sayings in the Bible are metaphoric. Why? Because to label something is to limit it. This is why the first Christian school in Alexandria taught a completely allegorical interpretation of the scriptures. All perception is projection. None of us see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And history shows what this looks like. Every part of culture changes when the sun moves from one astrological sign to the next, and religion is no exception. The shift from Taurus to Aries occurred around the time we're told the Israelites came out of Egypt and sacrificed change from bulls to sheep. Those who didn't like the change tried to hold on to the old ways and built a golden calf, which Moses wasn't too thrilled about. The following centuries were filtered through the lens and language of shepherds, and this understanding of God continued until the ages changed again from Aries to Pisces. Sheep were replaced with fish, and shepherds with fishermen. Salvation suddenly required immersion in water, and boats brought the gospel to every corner of the earth. What changes will the shift to Aquarius bring? We're about to find out. Whether it's an age of freedom or return to slavery remains to be seen. Be warned that those who understand the cycle always use it to manipulate those that don't. An example of this from the last age is when followers of the Way were told not to call anyone teacher or father, and that they didn't need anyone to teach them because they already knew all things. And then we're supposed to believe that they went out and invented a religion to teach them and called those teachers fathers. Nope, I'm not buying it. And neither should you. So, how do we fix it? The answer has been in front of you all your life. We call it story. The hero must lose himself to find himself. And so must you.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
The way to truth is the retroductive removal of programming. We must unlearn all we have learned. Why? Because you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. Doesn't matter if we're talking about science or theology, everything we know is wrong. And it's only after discovering this do we find that everything we know is right. There's only one story. There's only one person in that story, and that person is you.